Hi guys, I'm Jenny Harrison with Teach Me GIS. Thought I'd show you just a quick little couple of tips and tricks for symbology in ArcGIS Pro. These are slides from a conference talk I did just recently here in Houston for the ESRI Energy Resources Conference. So here's what we're going to talk about in this couple of minutes, just bivariate symbology in ArcGIS Pro and a little bit of arcade. We have to start somewhere, so we're starting assuming you are currently using ArcGIS Pro, at least a little bit, and you understand the basics of symbology in ArcGIS Pro, because we're just going to kind of start in the middle and show you this bivariate symbology. So suppose your boss wants a map that shows your well production volumes against the number of days that they've been offline, or how much you paid for leases with how much production we're getting from them, or the potential for a good reservoir and the potential for a good source rock at the same time. How do you do that in ArcGIS Pro? How do you show two different attributes at the same time? Well, there are lots of ways depending on whether those attributes are both numeric or one's numeric and one's text, or they're both text. But in this case, we're going to focus on two numeric values and you want to show them at the same time without actually changing anything in the table or doing any calculations. So you do that with bivariate symbology. It allows you to expose two numeric attributes with one legend or one symbology type. And you can compare those two numeric values even if they have different units or different scales. This data is provided by Earth Science Associates and their GOM cubed product, but these are offshore oil leases in the Gulf of Mexico. And what we're showing with this color scheme is the amount that was paid for this lease. This is a chunk of land where, well, water, where an oil company has the right to drill. So we're showing how much the oil companies paid for that lease compared to how much oil they're actually producing from that lease. Now, you guys in the industry will know this is a very simplified example because we're not considering gas production at the same time. It's just strictly oil production. But just to demonstrate the concept, right? So the shades of purple indicate how much was paid for the lease, and the shades of green indicate how much oil is coming out of that, out of the wells in that lease. And so the areas that are really of interest to us are the ones that are very dark green with hardly any purple in them, right? This guy up here. So we paid very little for it, but we're getting a real high oil production. The really dark purplish greenish ones, those guys are, we paid a lot for them, but it's okay because we're getting a lot of oil out of them. It's the purple ones down here that we're worried about, right? Because we paid a lot of money for them, but we're not getting a lot of oil out of them. So that's called bivariate symbology, and all you need is two numeric fields. In this case, I have a bid amount paid for the lease, and the oil cumulative production. And then, so what I do is I go into the symbology pane in ArcGIS Pro, and I choose bivariate colors as my symbology type. Then I have to choose the first field and the second field. If I want to, I can change my grid size from 3x3 to 4x4. And I can change the color scheme that's used for that bivariate symbology. Anyway, I thought you'd find this really useful. A lot of people haven't tried it out. It's very easy to do. So you can see here in Pro, there are my leases. The symbology looks like this. It's bivariate colors. And again, let me just get it over here for one that's already been done. All right, I've chosen my bid amount, my other column I want to color on, which for me was going to be oil cumulative production. In the slide, you saw oil cumulative production, but it turns out I really want to consider both the oil and the gas production. So I'll show you that in just a second. But so I choose the two fields, and then I choose my grid size, 2x2, 3x3, or 4x4, and my color scheme. And notice you have your standard classification methods as well. We'll talk about that in another video if you're interested. So anyway, that's how you make the bivariate symbology. But what's interesting about this particular data set is that I do know both oil and gas production in these leases, but they're in two separate columns in the attribute table, so I'd like to combine them. So let me show you how we do that. So we do that using Arcade, very simple little expression language for manipulating data on the fly for symbology. We can do many things with it, but symbology is one of the things. So I can add together the oil production and the gas production on the fly and not have to actually make a change to the database table. So all I have to do is, originally I had the oil cumulative production column chosen, but I have to hit this little expression button, opens my expression builder, and lets me build the expression, take the oil cumulative production plus the barrels of oil equivalent gas cumulative production. So I'm adding these two fields together. Interestingly, in my data, those fields were actually text fields, and so I needed to convert them to numbers on the fly before I added them up. So I've put the arcade number function around the column name, and I've added so it's take the number version of the dollar feature dot oil cumulative plus the number value of dollar feature dot barrels of oil equivalent cumulative. So anyway, that's a little tiny bit of arcade that solves two problems for me. Number one, it converts these columns into numbers so that I can use them in the bivariate colors symbology. And number two, it adds together the oil and the gas production on the fly, which is really cool if I don't have write permission to that table and I can't add a column and do the calculation permanently in the column. You don't have to type in the dollar feature dot, right? In Arcade, you don't have to type that. Just double click the column name. It'll put the syntax in there for you. All right, so that's one thing. Now, while we're talking about Arcade, no, not that Arcade, this Arcade. Let's talk about places it can be used. Arcade can be used in labels, in pop-ups, in symbology, and in the field calculator. So I'm going to just show you a couple of quick little examples. Well, I'm not going to show you labels because that works very similar to when we use VB and Python back in ArcMap. So I'm going to show you some of these other options. So first of all, Arcade can be used, as we've seen already, for symbology, for manipulating the data on the fly for that symbology. So I'll show you an example here. I have a bunch of wells out in the Gulf of Mexico. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to color code these wells based on the number of years that they've been producing. But I don't have number of years they've been producing in my database table. Whoops, that was a little fast. All I have is the spud date. That's the date when they were drilled. So let's pretend they start producing on the day that they're drilled. So let's pretend this is the first production day. Again, those of you in the industry will know it's a little more technical than that, but let's pretend. So here's the first date, and Arcade can tell me what today is. Arcade has a function called now that can tell me what today is. So I can take today and subtract from it the spud date and figure out how long they've been producing, but I want to simplify it down to just years. So what I can do is I can take the year portion of the spud date and the year portion of today's date and subtract those two. And I can do that with a simple Arcade expression. The thing is, though, I'm going to highlight this so you can see. That's this portion of the Arcade expression over here. Okay. Thing is, though, I only want to do that for the wells that are still producing. So if they're already plugged and abandoned, I don't want to mess with them, right? So I had to put another bit of Python over here that lets me pick out only the wells that are not plugged and abandoned. But I can put it all in one little Arcade expression. So let me show you what I did. I'm taking the column called stat prod. You can see that up here. That column tells me the status of the well, whether it's producing or not. If it says P&A, that stands for plugged and abandoned, those wells are no longer producing. So I'm going to say, look at the stat prod column, take the first three characters off the stat prod value, that gives me P&A for these. Take the first three characters, and if those first three characters are not equal to P&A, if they're not plugged and abandoned, then go and calculate the years that they've been producing. So how do I say if the first three characters are not P&A? Well, I say I use the Arcade left function of $feature.statprod. $feature is kind of like a point or a cursor to the record it's processing right now. So think of it as a pointer here to this first record. Go to $feature.statprod, see if the first three characters are P and A. If so, skip them. Then go down to the second $feature.statprod. Check its P and A. Check its first three characters. So anyway, that's the first bit. It's saying if, notice that it's if the left three digits of the statprod value is not equal to plugged and abandoned, then do this stuff. Otherwise, meaning it is equal to plugged and abandoned, just return a 0, meaning it's not producing anymore. Okay, so the if statement in Arcade looks like this. If some condition is true, this whole bit is my condition, then do this stuff. Otherwise, else, do this stuff. So that if is one long if statement altogether. So I'm saying if the first three characters of $feature.statprod is not equal to, bang equal, right? Not equal to plugged and abandoned, then do this. Take the absolute value of the year portion of the $feature.spud date, pull off the year portion, 1917, subtract it from the year portion of now. There's that function that goes out and gets today's date from my computer. Now, reads the date, pulls off the year portion, 2022, subtracts it from the spud date, 1917, takes the absolute value of it, returns that back to my legend. So there you go. If it's not plugged and abandoned, subtract today's date from the spud date, take the absolute value of that, return that to my legend, and then create a color scheme based on those number of years this thing's been producing. So try that out if you haven't used Arcade. It's quite easy. Again, you don't have to type a lot of it in. Double click the column name. It'll put the $feature in there for you. Go over here and look at your functions. You can go up here and filter them so you can see only string functions or only numeric or only date functions, and you'll find all of those functions that I've used right here in this list of available Arcade functions. Okay, here's another example with leases. These are oil and gas leases onshore where I'm trying to show whether they've expired or not. In the oil industry, if we have a lease that's expiring this year, we need to check and see if we've got a well on it, or we need to drill a well, or we're going to lose the lease. So anyway, we can look around at the data, and in this case, I have an expire year column in the database table. So I'm going to take the $feature.expire year, which hopefully is in the future for me, and I'm going to subtract the year version of now. And so now I'm color coding the leases based on, well, if the number is less than 0, then that lease is already expired. And then if it's greater than 0, or, you know, if it's greater than or equal to 0, but less than or equal to 1, sorry, if it's less than or equal to 0, it's expiring this year. And so anyway, I built the little color scheme there based on the returned value of this expression. So try that out. It all starts here with the little expression button. Very easy to do if you've done any kind of scripting in the past. And even if you're new to scripting, it's a nice little expression language to learn. You don't have to learn how to write an entire program with it. There it is, blown up a little bit so it's easier to see. Okay, and just a little bit more, you can do something a little bit fancier if you want to, like this. In this case, there are a bunch of wells in Louisiana, and we have to be careful with when we're drilling around oyster beds. I'm pretending that in a certain year, some environmental regulations came into effect, and wells drilled before that year were not dependent, did not have to follow those rules, and wells drilled after that year, we have to make sure we followed all of those rules. But I don't want to change the data. I don't want to go out there and filter the data, make definition queries and all that. I just want to manipulate this data on the fly and check. If it was prior to the year 2000, then color it one color. If it's after the year 2000 colored a different color. So what I did is I went in here first and I did a unique value legend on the drill year just to show you the different years in the data. But then I hit this expression button. And with this expression button, I built a different symbology. See, I put an if condition. Now it's not an I if because I'm not putting it all on one line. I've spread it out a little bit. So it's if $feature.drill year, right? That's the column name. $feature.drill year, that's the pointer, kind of the cursor checking each one of the records. If $feature.drill year is less than 2000, so I have a drill year attribute, right? Then, that little curly brace can be read as then, return the value prior to regulations. Return that text string back to my legend builder. Then I close up the if condition with a closed curly brace. And I say else, meaning it was drilled on or after the year 2000, else, open curly brace, return the value after regulation, see? So if the drill year is less than 2000, return this, otherwise return this. And those things are fed back to the legend, right? So now, instead of just color coding on drill year, I'm coloring on that custom field that I created. By the way, I could give it a better name up here. So now I'm coloring on the words after, the phrase after the regulation or prior to the regulation, see? So those are the two values that got returned to my legend. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, so that's manipulating the values on the fly for the purpose of symbology with a tiny little bit of arcade. And there's one more thing that's way cool is that you can actually use arcade. You remember I said you could use it in labels and field calculations, symbology, and pop-ups. Well, I'm going to show you now about using it in a label. I said I wasn't going to, but I'm going to show you one little label. What I would like to do is I would like to label these fields with their area in square miles, but I don't have an area in square miles column in my attribute table. In fact, pretend like this is a shapefile and doesn't even have an area at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of arcade. What my expression is going to say first label with the $feature.name column. So I get the name in there, like Osiris, right? And then I'm going to add to that a new line, double quote, \n, double quote. That's a new line, just like it is in Python. Right, for you guys who did this in VB script back in ArcMap, that would have been a VB new line. In Python and Arcade, it's a \n. So put the name plus a \n plus, now I'm going to bring in the tricky little geometry functions from Python. See, the area function will go and calculate the area of that polygon on the fly. So all I have to do is I have to tell it, I have to pass in $feature as that thing I want it to return the area for. It's the current polygon that it's labeling right now. And then I have to give it what units I want. And you can get this list of units and exactly how they're spelled in the arcade help for ArcGIS Pro, but I want it in square miles. I have to spell it just like that inside double quotes. So that's a key word, okay? And I'm rounding it, the round function is being used, I'm rounding it off to 0 decimal places, so I just get the whole numbers. And then I'm adding to that the text square miles so that the SQMI shows up there in the label. Cool, right? So what happened is Arcade calculated the area on the fly in the units I was interested in without me having to do anything to the database table. So if I don't have write permission to the table, that's okay. So again, try this out, but more importantly, check out all of those different geometry functions that exist out there in Arcade. Google search Arcade or use your favorite search engine, Arcade ArcGIS Pro. Don't just do Arcade, you'll end up with Pac-Man. So one last one, I'm going to show you how to configure a pop-up with Arcade. So in this case, I have right-clicked on a layer that I want to configure a pop-up for, right? So I'm over here, and I go to Configure Pop-ups in Pro, right? To get my pop-up configuration pane. Now, what you'll normally see are all the columns in the table, but I'm going to go down here to expressions and build something special using Arcade. I'll just show you back here. So those are the normal fields in my table. I'm going to go down here to expressions. That opens the Arcade Expression Builder. And I'm going to build the expression, well, whatever expression you want, right? You could, in this case, I'm taking the, just like if you're building a label, I'm taking the owner or the holder of a lease and I'm adding to it a new line and I'm adding to it the status of the lease, like whether it's currently held by production or if it's expired or what. Okay, so that's boring because that's just a regular old add a couple of columns together. But when this gets, oh, and by the way, that shows up as a custom expression at the bottom of the list of columns, the list of fields in your pop-up configuration shows up down the bottom. Again, I could have renamed it. That would help me remember what this guy is. Okay, but that's boring because that's just adding a few fields together. When it gets interesting is when you bring in some of those geometry functions from Arcade. So for example, suppose what I'd like to do is I would like to click on a point and then I'd like to buffer the identified feature and give some stats about what's nearby. So specifically what I want to do is I want the user to be able to click on a well and my pop-up will tell them how many other wells are nearby. Let's say how many other wells are within a mile of the well they click on. So just so you can see the results, I'll show you what it looks like over here first. If I identify a well out here, well, that's the only well in that area. See, this is my custom field that I added. But if I click on a well way over here in this cluster, let's say down here, and say, oh, there are 36 wells within one mile of that well that I just clicked on. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. I'm getting that count. But you can do all kinds of statistics with these tools, with these Arcade functions. So how do I do it? Well, I go configure my pop-up and I build an expression again. And when I do that, let me just show you quickly again where I do that, right? I'm over here. I'm configuring my pop-up and I'm going to hit this expression button down at the bottom. And I would build a new expression. I've already got one though, so I can just edit it. Opens the expression builder. Okay, so it's a little hard to see here, so I've stretched out the expression, made it a little bit bigger down at the bottom so you can see it better. So let's talk through this real quick. So the first, it's only 4 lines. It's very short, quick little Arcade script. So I'm creating a variable called wells layer that basically is going to connect to the layer of wells that I'm trying to query, that I'm trying to select against, right? So I do that with the feature set by name function in Arcade. It goes out and creates an object that points to that wells layer I'm interested in. And this guy needs to know what map I want to work on and what's the name of the layer I want to work on. You can get the rest of the syntax from just Google ArcGIS, Arcade, feature set by name. But anyway, $map is always the variable that points to the map you're working on right now. So that's there for you automatically. So $map, and then wells by drill year is the layer name that I want, the layer that I want to retrieve. Okay, so that creates the object for the wells layer. And then, which is, again, if you're not familiar with objects, it's basically kind of like a connection, an open connection to that wells layer. It's grabbed that wells layer and said, hey, dude, you're the one I'm going to work with right now. I'm going to hold on to you. Okay, so that creates the object for the wells layer. And then I create another variable called 1 mile ring using the geoprocessing buffer function in Arcade. So buffer works just like buffer in Toolbox. It creates a ring around an existing feature. But you don't see the ring when you're doing it with Arcade. It creates it in memory. So $feature is a pointer to that one feature that you just clicked on, right? When you're doing identify, $feature is the one you just clicked on. And then the 1 is my buffer distance and miles is my buffer units. That's all it's required. So now I know what I've got my object for my wells layer. I've got my 1 ring buffer, 1 mile ring buffer sitting there in memory in the 1 mile ring variable. And now I create a third variable called nearby wells count. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to use another geoprocessing function called contains that finds out, find all the wells that this 1 mile ring contains, and select them kind of in memory, right? So I pass to contains my 1 mile ring buffer and the layer that I'm trying to find out whether it's, which ones are contained by this 1 mile ring. And so that, yeah, it selects all the wells that this 1 mile ring contains, and then it passes that selected set to the count function. And now I'm left with the number of wells within 1 mile of the one well that I clicked on, and that's the value that's returned back out to my pop-up configuration, that nearby wells count. So try this out. If you've never seen these arcade geometry functions, they're really powerful for pop-ups, for symbology, for labeling. Just Google search arcade functions and look at the geometry functions section. Really powerful stuff. Well, hopefully this has been useful. Thanks for watching this little video. Check out teachmegis.com if you want to learn more about arcade or Python or attribute rules or model builder in Pro or any Vertigo Studio courses. Thanks for watching.